On Tuesday, a report from the Federal Trade Commission called out the middlemen that are hiking up the price of life-saving medications. These are drugs that treat cancer, AIDS, MS, and other very serious issues, right? These drugs were jacked up, the price, way over the going rate, as much as 1,000% between the years of 2017 and 2022. So yeah, that's not a lot of time. Now, these upcharges provided about $7.3 billion in additional revenue to the pharmacies owned by these same corporations. The middlemen, usually paid competitor pharmacies less for dispensing the same drugs, even at massive markups. Over that period, costs to commercial plans for the same class of drugs grew by 21%. For Medicare Part D plans, they grew between 14 to 15%, according to the reports. So now, this report was one of two current reports issued by the agency in an investigation of something called PBMs, which is Pharmacy Benefit Managers, okay? And the way these things work is quite the racket, all right? So now, one report issued last July said that these PBM practices appear to be raising prices and hurting patients because, well, obviously, these patients will have less access to these medications. So now the latest report looked at the prices of something called generic specialty drugs, which you would think, like, if they're generic, then they should be cheaper, right? Because name brand drugs always cost more. But in this case, since they are specialty drugs, these PBMs can actually charge more for them. Now, these specialty drugs, again, are used to treat complex conditions such as cancer. But they're not under patent, right? But these middlemen tend to control the pricing of these drugs. And so even though they are generic, the prices for them are marked up to a point where there's almost no difference between the pricing of the name brand and the generic. So that's a bit of a problem. In fact, according to Hannah Garden Monheat, the director of the FTC's Office on Policy Planning, the FTC have found that the big three PBMs are charging enormous markups on dozens of life-saving drugs. We also found that this problem is growing at an alarming rate, which means there is an urgent need for policymakers to address it. Will they? Odds are no, they probably won't. And that's all has to do with these same companies that are represented by industry groups, okay? Like the Pharmaceutical Care Management Association. They were not exactly thrilled at this report from the FTC because they represent the middlemen. Companies like CVS, Caremark, Optum Rx, and Express Scripts. These are the PBMs, okay? These health conglomerates, by the way, also own the insurers, the pharmacies, and even providers, such as doctors' offices. So they really own all this stuff. And so, as the middlemen, these PBMs can set the prices. Now, they negotiate prices with the drug makers. They can create their own pharmacy networks. They can determine reimbursements and reconcile claims. And so with all of that power, well, I mean, that's not good for the consumer, right? Now, they work on behalf of insurers, including ones owned by the same corporations, their parent corporation, and together, the three big PBMs control access to nearly 80% of all insured patients. They have essentially what is a monopoly. There is so much power and very, very little transparency. Now, in their newest report, the FTC said that PBM's parent companies are using the fact that they have such a gigantic role in multiple phases of drug transactions. They're using it to advantage themselves. Truthout's report on this explains that the PBMs decide which drugs are covered and which will have the smallest copayments. So patients have a great incentive to buy whichever medicines the PBMs prefer, wherever the PBMs want people to buy them. So there's some anti-competitive practices there. As part of their vertical integration, the big PBMs each own something called a mail order specialty pharmacy. The big PBMs often require the patients to get expensive specialty drugs at their affiliated mail order pharmacies if they want to get the lowest copayment. So now that's important too, because they're often charging the government and insurance companies a huge amount of money. And of course, the insurance companies will also have a pretty large copayment for those medications. Now, you think that, but if everything's, vertically aligned and integrated, it would create more efficiency, right? So that people can get the drugs, at least they can get the drugs when they need it because it's all right there. But no, that's not what happens. An example of this is somebody named Alvin Weir, who back in 2018 talked to the Columbus Dispatch and told them about weeks-long waits to get his specialty cancer drugs from the mail order specialty pharmacy he was forced by the PBM to use. What happened? Well, he died. He died because, they made him wait. They made him wait. Now, that said, regardless of whether the PBMs affiliated mail order pharmacies provide better or worse care, because I guess it can vary. Like, for example, United Health, their PBM might not be so good like other parts of the company. Wouldn't be a shocker, right? But others might be more efficient. But regardless of any of that, when it comes to generic specialty drugs, these companies are able to rake in, these middlemen can rake in so much money for their parent corporation. According to the report, the big three PBMs generated an additional $1.4 billion by charging more for drugs than they paid the pharmacies that dispensed them. So there's your markup, okay? That markup, a lot of that cost gets absorbed by the taxpayer, by the government, right? But there's another group that's affected as well, and that is employers. Now, one of the arguments for single-payer healthcare, for example, that gets overlooked, that doesn't get talked about enough, is actually how much it would save employers. They wouldn't have to offer health plans, and they wouldn't have to, negotiate with these PBMs for what kind of drug coverage, right? And of course, they wouldn't have to pay out so much to these PBMs if one of their employees gets sick and needs access to these drugs. Okay. And so, yeah, single payer would actually save these companies money, because then you would have the government, which would have the power to negotiate drug prices with these giant companies. And of course, the government is going to want to get the best deal for the taxpayer. But of course, you have these industry groups that fight tooth and nail, okay, against single payer, and they bought off a lot of our politicians, which again will go and tell you lies about how, this will make your insurance worse. No, it'll make your insurance better, and you won't have to pay a premium or a copay or anything like that. And it would just be taken from your taxes, 5% from your taxes versus 20% from your paycheck in premiums and copays and all this, deductibles, etc. Yeah, I think I know where the value is. Okay. And the value is in a single payer healthcare system, which is why Big Pharma is one of the biggest lobbying sources against single payer healthcare, and even against a public option, because, if the government has the ability to negotiate drug prices and actually has the power to do that, they're one of the biggest customers. Okay. For example, for Medicare, right? and Medicaid, things like that. One of the biggest customers. So that gives them a lot of power, a lot of leverage. All right. So yeah, that's one of the reasons that they fight so hard against this. But anyway, speaking of government's role, right? Well, the incoming administration is going to have the DOGE, right? Department of Government Efficiency. If they were actually serious about finding ways to save the government money, while, also helping employers save money, okay, then they would be encouraging a crackdown on these PBMs. They would be in favor of what the FTC is supposed to do, which is break up monopolies, right? To foster actual competition. They would be advocating against allowing these middlemen to continuously upcharge the taxpayer for medications they purchased at a much lower price. But of course, they won't. No. The Doge brothers, they're going to instead advocate for an increase in retirement age, okay, and the slashing of benefits. That's what they're going to do, while allowing these companies to get away with pretty much everything. At the end of the day, Elon Musk doesn't know a damn thing about running government. Barely even runs his own businesses. He's like paying people to power level his character in Path of Exile. Or is it Path of Exile 2 and Diablo 4? So, yeah, I'm a gamer. So he doesn't do anything, really. He doesn't even play his own video games. What does he do all day? Cracks himself out on ketamine and goes on, posting binges on Twitter. That's really it. And doesn't care at all about protecting consumers. No, of course not. No, the only thing that Elon Musk is there to do is just to convince all of his tech bro followers to allow Wall Street and the government under Trump to cut their benefits and to privatize important programs like Social Security and Medicare. They ain't looking out for you. They're just looking out for themselves. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, subscribe with the bell icon in order to get notified whenever a new video is released. And if you want to support independent, progressive media through this difficult time where it seems like everybody is shutting down, you can become a member on our YouTube page, you can become a subscriber on Facebook, or you can go to my Patreon. It's patreon.com/Jeff Waldorf. Thank you.